Live, where news comes first. This is ABC-7 Xtra.
It's the moment so many people will remember for decades. Pope Francis walking up a ramp a stone's throw away from the Rio Grande. He got a good look at El Paso and the Franklin Mountains and waved to a group in El Paso, some of them undocumented immigrants on our side of the border. The pontiff also prayed in silence for migrants fleeing violence and persecution all over the world. Vatican officials say it was no coincidence the Pope visited the borderland a week into Lent. They say it's a period of reflection and change for Christians. Good evening, I'm Maria Garcia. Tonight we're recapping the historic visit and analyzing its impact on the borderland and in our country. Joining us, Dr. Kathleen Staudt, UTEP political science professor, whose research also focuses on border relations, and City Representative Peter Svarzbein. You can email us your comments and questions now to ABC7Xtra at KVIA.com. You can also reach us at 915-496-1775. On Twitter, tweet me at MariaGABC7. The Pope this week had a powerful message for hundreds of thousands of people at the old Juarez Fairgrounds and those around the world watching the Mass on television. Was the main event of the visit, the Mass. Pope Francis spoke about the struggle of immigrants. He said immigrants seeking the path to the north don't always know what they're going to encounter along the border. He called for open hearts and recognition that the thousands of Central and South Americans who are fleeing gangland executions and extortion in their homeland are victims of the worst forms of exploitation. Pope Francis's first stop, though, is considered one of the most dangerous places in Juarez, the Cerezo State Prison. Nearly 800 prison inmates, including 100 women, welcomed him with cheers and applause. A female inmate delivered a powerful speech saying they are the forgotten and marginalized. A group of inmates even performed a song for the Pope. The pontiff gave them his blessings inside the prison's chapel. Afterward, he spoke to them and urged them to use their experience in prison for good and to help end the cycle of violence that has torn Mexico apart in recent years. The next stop for the Pope was at the Colegio de Bachilleres, where he was greeted by workers and business owners.
Gracias, amadísimo Papa Francisco, pastor con olor a oveja, Papa de nuestro pueblo.
The Pope said he is aware of the labor issues dividing maquiladora workers and their employers. He listened carefully as a worker talked about her long shifts in the factory and how it has affected her family. Pope Francis has stressed the importance of mothers and fathers spending more time with their children, and he called on workers and business leaders to work together.
Every time we had to sit at a negotiating table, I knew I had to lose something so we could all win. That was the philosophy of a working man. When you negotiate, something is always lost, but everyone wins.
Once the Pope arrived to the Mass, another crowd of about 35,000 people gathered at the Sun Bowl for the Two Nations One Faith celebration here in El Paso. Pope Francis acknowledged the faithful that came from Arizona, New Mexico, California, Louisiana, and other Texas cities. The pontiff said borders cannot strip communities of the faith they share.
Gracias, hermanos y hermanas de El Paso.
Thank you to our brothers and sisters in El Paso for making us feel like a single community, a single Christian community.
Joining us now are UTEP Professor Kathy Staudt and City Representative Peter Svarzbein. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Of course. So what do you think will be the lasting message of the day? Dr. Staudt, we'll start with you.
Well, I think for me, looking at the recovery of Ciudad Juarez, the reduction in violence, the major message for many people, after all, it is a city where almost half of the people live in poverty, as Mexico defines it. I think the major message will be that workers cannot, should not have to exploit themselves in order to be able to work. I think that the message of extremely low wages, what some people call near slave wages, is something that got communicated. And I hope that both employers and employees will be able to do something about that so that we have some standards of decency for wages here at the border.
Mm-hmm. You know, the pontiff used his time in Juarez, in part, he also criticized Mexico's ruling class for, he said, failing to protect people from predatory criminal gangs, from poverty, from corruption. What kind of impact do you think that will have on Mexico?
Well, I don't think that we can expect people in power to automatically do the right thing. You accept it? I think that it's really up to people now to take that message from the Pope, the inspiring message, what some people believe to be divinely inspired, and to take that and organize with it and press authorities to do the right thing. And to create laws that protect workers and set a higher minimum wage for their work.
You know, even during the news conferences there, when I was in Ciudad Juarez, news conferences with the governor of Chihuahua, with Juarez diocese officials, you know, they said the Pope's visit cannot change Ciudad Juarez. Only the people of Ciudad Juarez, maybe empowered by his message, inspired by his message, can mobilize to change Ciudad Juarez. But one day, one visit does not change Ciudad Juarez. What were your thoughts on the city when I know you were there, not at the Mass, but I know you spent the day in Juarez.
I could have gone into the Mass. Unfortunately, by the time I tried to get in there, it had closed early. They had given out way too many tickets, and so by 12:30 they were not letting anybody else in. I think what you were talking about is exactly kind of the lasting message, and that is a message of hope, and that is a message of resiliency and also of responsibility. The Bible portion that the Pope talks about, ultimately, that he talked about there, ultimately speaks about the need for people to take responsibility in building the kind of society that they want to build. And myself, when I was there, I'm not Catholic, I'm Jewish, and the feeling and energy that was there that day was something that was very, very special and remarkable. In a city that still has a lot of pain, in a city that was going through a lot of darkness not too many years ago, to see people filled with joy, to see people filled with energy, to see people filled with hope again, to be out on the streets in peace and in relative safety was something that was really remarkable and something that I will never forget. Yeah, I mean, it truly was. That was especially touching, was the energy. I mean, Catholic or not, believer or not, if you were in Ciudad Juarez, it was really difficult not to feel that. Hundreds of thousands of people excited, thrilled, the world watching Ciudad Juarez often in the spotlight for violence, for drugs, for crime, for bloodshed. And here it was in the eyes of the world for hope and peace and a special visit from the Pope. It was such a special moment. And the thing with the Pope, I mean, especially with Pope Francis, is he's so much guided towards placing an emphasis on people rather than himself. So much of his pursuit towards dogma, towards the Catholic faith, has been one of do what you can. He's been outspoken in terms of atheists, in terms of Jewish people and others, that you can be a good person and not have to be Catholic, not have to be practicing, not even believe in God. And that's a revolutionary concept and a revolutionary statement from a pope. And I think that one of the things, again, one of the lasting things there was that he really encouraged people to think about what kind of city that they want, what kind of town that they want, how do they want to run their businesses, how do we want to treat people that are hopeless and in prison, how do they want to treat themselves, how do you not give up but continue to insist on rebuilding and growing. Dr. Staudt? Yeah, I think we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that this was a binational experience and that the Pope was looking northward from the south
when he was talking about immigrants. There were pilgrims to the border who put the wonderful sign up on the fence saying immigrant lives matter. The Pope used stories, narratives from the Bible to draw parallels between biblical figures and immigrants who are escaping violence. And so this was a message not just to Ciudad Juarez and not just to Mexico, it's a message to El Paso and to the entire United States.
Mm-hmm. You know, Bishop Mark Seitz, from the El Paso Diocese, has told us that it's very clear that the Pope is familiar, is interested in what's happening in this part of the world and in the El Paso Juarez border. The Pope appealed for governments to open their hearts to, quote, human tragedy of forced migration. At one point, I think a really powerful moment was when he said, quote, no more death, no more exploitation. How did that message resonate in both countries?
I think that there might have been some of the people the Pope would call exploiters who might have been made nervous by these statements. After all, there are a lot of people who benefit from the extremely low-cost labor in Ciudad Juarez. So perhaps some of them were squirming in their seats and wondering what they could do or what they should do. But again,
perhaps some of them were in the 20,000 chairs in the VIP section.
Maybe.
At the Mass, perhaps?
Mm-hmm, maybe. But I hope that they think about this long and hard and work in a collaborative way with better legislation and with organized people who say something needs to change here.
You know, I think there was obviously a lot of thought put into the Pope's visit and his stops. And I think one very powerful image was when you had him getting off at the airport, this celebration, you know, the moment finally here. And then he greets everyone, and his first stop is the Cerezo State Prison with barbed wired fence. You know, it was such a sort of powerful image to see him going into a place that's considered one of the most dangerous in Chihuahua.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really speaks volumes kind of about his sort of passion and his background within a specific style of Catholicism, with a liberation theology background, and with really the understanding of the fact that we need to treat all people fairly, and that those that are hopeless, we need to encourage and insist that you can improve yourselves. And again, in a region like ours that has dealt with a lot of issues recently, that's a very powerful message. And I think that, you know, you look at kind of what the space that he has chosen, you know, to give the Mass, the fact of its relationship to El Paso, and the fact that, again, it was looking directly north, but that site, you know, which has been renamed El Punto, is going to be a site of culture and of faith moving forward.
You know, we've been talking a lot about his message to people, right? What kind of society do you want? But I think he also had a message to the church, to the Catholic Church in Mexico. I read, you know, several comments that the Pope may believe that Mexico, with the second largest Catholic population in the world, is actually going through a very acute moral and political crisis, and that the church in that country needs to take a more active role in creating a more just country. What do you think about that?
Well, of course, Mexico has a special history, as do many Latin American countries, with the church, and it wasn't always a happy and a friendly history. So I think that calling for some kind of a change in these historical legacies will present somewhat of a challenge. But I do believe that in many countries, people of faith, you know, working with social justice messages in those traditions of faith, are often able to make appropriate arguments for change, to change the discourse, to change the way people think about things.
Speaking of workers, I know there's been a lot of news about you know, the most recent example we can use, the Lexmark workers who went on strike, saying they were essentially not paid what they were owed, comparing it to slavery at some point. What can be done? I mean, what are the processes? How can people in Mexico mobilize the Pope's message?
Mm-hmm. Well, I've done a lot of research on the border and border relations, and one striking thing about the U.S.-Mexico border, as developed by economists in other parts of the world, is that we are the 17th most unequal border in the entire world. And I find that somewhat shameful and embarrassing, and I think that leaders on both sides of the border would want to do something to change that. Because after all, people at this border interact across the border frequently. And many of our own businesses on this side of the border do depend on pedestrian shoppers and people who come to the malls and shop. And when the wages are so low, when people get paid in a day that is a rate less than what people get paid for an hour of work in this country, the inequality is too great. I think we need more shared prosperity in our metropolitan region here at the border, given all of the interaction. I was also looking at another figure, finding that when you look at per person average income, per capita income, that is altered by purchasing power parity, that Mexico's minimum wage, which is set in Mexico City, is only 13% of that figure, and it's the 9th lowest in the world. I think that that officials in Mexico and representatives need to take a look at how their country stacks up compared to other countries around the world. Even The Economist, which is a relatively conservative magazine, has taken Mexico to task for the extremely low wages and the low rate of growth in wages. And of course, with the peso devaluation, things are really, really tough for working people.
Well, we have to take a commercial break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the politics of the Pope's visit. Obviously, the Pope, responding to reporters about Donald Trump's comments, said he is not a Christian, and so the presidential candidate has struck back. We'll be right back. You're watching ABC-7 Extra. You can call us at 915-496-1775 if you have comments or questions. Email us at ABC7Extra at KVIA.com or tweet me at MariaGABC7.
I just got a call. As I'm walking up here, they said, Mr. Trump, the Pope made a statement about you. I said, the Pope? What did the Pope say? I like the Pope. I mean, was it good or bad? Because if it's good, I like the Pope. If it's bad, I don't like the Pope.
Well, it was bad for Mr. Trump. Tense words between Pope Francis and Donald Trump just a day after the Pope's visit to the borderland. Welcome back to ABC-7 Extra. Tonight we're talking about the impact of Pope Francis' visit to the borderland. While on his flight back to Rome, Pope Francis answered reporter questions about comments made by the Republican presidential candidate just before his visit to Mexico. Trump had called Pope Francis a, quote, very political person. He also called the pontiff a pawn of the Mexican government. According to the Pope, Donald Trump's desire to build a wall between Mexico and the U.S. isn't in line with Christianity.
As to whether I'm a pawn, well, maybe. I don't know. I'll leave that up to your judgment and that of the people. And then, a person who thinks only about building walls, wherever they may be located, and not building bridges, is not a Christian. This is not in the gospel. As far as what you said about whether I would advise to vote or not vote, I am not going to get involved in that. I say only that this man is not a Christian if he has said things like that.
And I'm a very good Christian because the Pope said something to the effect that maybe Donald Trump isn't Christian, okay? And he's questioning my faith. I was very surprised to see it, but I am a Christian. I'm proud of it. Okay, for a religious leader to question a person's faith is disgraceful. I'm proud to be a Christian, and as president, I will not allow Christianity to be consistently attacked and weakened, unlike what is happening now.
And joining us now again, UTEP professor Kathy Staudt and City Rep Peter Svarzbein. I don't think I even have to ask a question. I see both of you nodding your head. Representative Svarzbein, we'll start with you.
I mean, the fact that Trump had managed to go to start talking about a valid criticism that the Pope had in terms of the idea of walls versus borders, and then somehow turn it out that a Christian was attacking Christianity and he wouldn't allow Christianity to be attacked if he was president is kind of beyond absurd. The overarching thing is that it's true, you need to build bridges wherever they may be and not walls wherever they may be between yourself, between your family, between your community, or physical walls between nations as well. It's troubling when you hear Trump talk about it. It kind of reminded me in the break, one of the biggest holidays, or at least for me, one of the more important holidays in my own faith is Passover, the Passover Seder, where as Jews we go and retell the story of Exodus, of being slaves in Egypt, and understanding what it felt to be powerless and what it felt to be when you did not have control and you did not have power, and how important that is as a centering object. And so part of that also is to understand the behavior of how you are when you are powerful and how you should treat others when you are in a position of power. And to see Trump in his sort of belligerency not understand any of those sort of concepts is just troubling again.
But a lot of people agree with him. A lot of people agree with him. He's leading the Republican race for the White House, and there is a large constituency in the United States that believes there should be a wall and not a bridge between Mexico and the U.S.
I don't think people understand that many of the undocumented people in this country are here because of visa overstays, not because they crossed the land border in an unauthorized way. In fact, looking back at the tragedies of 9/11, the perpetrators of that terrorist attack did not come across the Mexican border and were here on visa overstays. And so to build a wall is a very blunt and inaccurate way of trying to target the problems that some of these people are referring to.
And it's also not effective because you build a 24-foot wall, you'll have a 25-foot ladder. The question is how do we understand how we can make our relationship with our neighbors work as an opportunity for both sides, and how can we treat this border not as a threat but as an opportunity?
The Christian vote has been something long coveted by especially Republican candidates, the evangelical constituency. In many cases tends to side with moderate to very conservative aisles of the political spectrum. Do you think that kind of message resonates with many evangelicals in the United States?
Well, the diversity among Christians is enormous. And I think that evangelicals and people who look at problems in a very thin and superficial way, it's probably not as great as what you've just been suggesting. I hope that people are willing to look at problems in a more complex and in-depth way. And so just as there are evangelicals and people like what we've just been talking about, there are also informed people on the other side. I was surprised that he was so quick to alienate a huge constituency, Catholics who may not be evangelicals, but who might have been offended by his comments and the moral authority that someone like the Pope carries.
Okay. Ugo tweeting at us, the time is up for the Mexican government to clean up its act. The Pope has put them on notice. Hashtag the time is now Mexico. Also tweeting at us, I attended the Sun Bowl event and felt it was the most profound spiritual gathering I have ever been a part of, period. And then another tweet from Hugo. The message from our Pope is unequivocal. The U.S. must ensure our policies toward immigration includes humane and just treatment. And then also we have an email from Roscoe. I'm glad the Pope came to Juarez. Hopefully it will be a catalyst for change in Mexico. Lord knows they need some positive change. I think it runs deeper than a few coats of paint on a prison. It's about change in the corruption and criminal culture that controls Mexico. Thank you for your email, Roscoe. We'll be right back. When we come back, we're going to take more of your emails and tweets. Stay with us. You're watching ABC-7 Extra. You can also call us at 915-496-1775, or again, tweet me at Maria G. ABC7. We'll be right back. Welcome back to ABC-7 Extra. An email from Curtis saying that the Pope did not say Trump was not a Christian. What the Pope said was anyone who builds walls is not Christian, meaning it is not a Christian act. Please let's not perpetuate this disinformation by those who wish to malign a good man. And Jesse emailing us, if the position of your guests is that policing the border in any way is a fruitless endeavor, then why do we even bother investigating murder or robbery? It's not going to prevent murder or people being robbed, so why bother?
I don't think either of us suggested that there should be open borders or that crime shouldn't be investigated. For me, I do believe that time is long overdue for an overhaul of the immigration system. I think that we need immigration reform to find some pathway for good people who haven't committed crimes to be able to apply for naturalization.
Yeah, and in the case of myself, I mean, I think it's vitally important that we have a conversation here about how do we maximize the ability of people to move efficiently and safely across this border. As we all know, tens of thousands of people cross every single day. Rich people, poor people, goods and trade. So how is it that we go and actually make it more efficient? You know, one of the things that we had put up with council that I co-sponsored was to look at the second phase of a multimodal transportation opportunity for the border.
Right. And we had the bishop sites here last week, and the diocese saying, the Catholic Church has never called for open borders or condoned illegal immigration. In fact, Pope Francis stopped short of calling outright for the U.S. to open borders, but he urged recognition that the multitudes fleeing gangland killings and extortion in their homelands are victims. And I think his main message was compassion. Let's go to Robert in Fort Bliss. Robert, what's your comment or your question?
What about the ones that are coming across that U.S. Customs and Border Patrol look the other direction? What are they going to do about that?
Thank you very much. Robert saying, what about the people who come across that border officials, CBP, and Border Patrol look the other way?
Immediately, and at any cost.
What do you all think about that?
Well, I don't think that our officials look the other way. I mean, we have ports of authority, people go through. Back in the early 1990s, we had Operation Hold the Line, which was a kind of a blockade. And so people who might be crossing in an unauthorized way are not doing it near our city, but are doing it in very dangerous areas. Yeah. And that's part of the reason why they're dying in places like Arizona and Sonora.
Gabriel tweeting at us, the Pope event showed that there's nobody paying attention to the separation of church and state in El Paso. Do you want to take that one, Representative Svarzbein?
I mean, what I thought was really remarkable about the event was the amount of people, was the fact that we had Americans coming back to Juarez who hadn't crossed over in 10 years. My friend Gabriel's mother came to the Mass. She was very nervous about going. She finally went and did it and came over and felt that it was a beautiful event. You could hear the birds chirping. You could see the people smiling and enjoy. So that was a very remarkable thing. I personally met and photographed people from Denver, from San Antonio.
We're going to take those photographs in just a little bit, but Gabriel Street specifically talking about the separation of church and state in El Paso. As a city official, can you talk about what you did to ensure that there was separation of church and state in regards to the city's efforts right across the border?
So first, we were very thankful that we had no incidents in terms of any sort of injuries that occurred on the American side and on the Mexican side as well. When you have an anticipated large influx of people, safety is a very important consideration, as well as having, there was 800 press that were between the two cities as well. So there's accommodations that need to be had for that.
And he's a head of state.
And he's a head of state.
On the border.
There was some concerns and some questions about more of a balance between safety and security concerns and concerns about constituents and neighborhoods being able to have access to see him.
You expressed disappointment that there were going to be hundreds of reporters descending on El Paso, and they were going to see, 250,000 people rejoicing in peace in Ciudad Juarez, and then look to El Paso and see essentially law enforcement, a heavy presence of law enforcement, closed streets. Did that make you sad at that day?
Yeah, it was. I think it was frustrating. I also think there was a lot of lessons learned from it. It seems that since I've been in office, process has been the name of the day, and we talk about process and we try to understand this process of between city manager, council manager form of government, with the mayor, with the manager, with the council, and my concern was what was the process that led us to these decisions, because I think that when it comes towards decisions of security, as a democracy we need to ask that question of a balance between liberty and between security. Benjamin Franklin said it himself, those who are willing to give up liberty for security deserve neither. And I just wanted to ask questions about that to see what is it that we could do, and moving forward, what is it that we can do to prepare. The fact is that there was a little over 2 months that we had concrete information that a head of state like the Pope was coming to this area.
Which is an unusually short time.
Which is an extremely unusual short period of time, and we have a great police department, so I think that at the end of the day, people, were being cautious, and we're thankful that we didn't have any major incidents.
I want to end the show with some of the images that you captured from the day. Some of these images were picked up by Vice, obviously a national global publication, and you photographed everyone essentially that day except the Pope, and purposely so. You wanted to sort of capture the energy of that day.
Yeah, I kind of think the Pope would have wanted me to do that if I had a chance to talk to him. He's guided so much towards a mission of communicating to people and having people have hope in themselves again. So concentrating on him, I thought, was secondary to the people and to the emotion that was there, because at the end of the day, that emotion and that energy and that hope is what's going to stay with us, and cause us to have a conversation and action towards bettering our region for today and for tomorrow. And so I really wanted to capture that joy on this very special day that I think really transcended borders, race, religion, and class.
And Dr. Staudt, these are the people who will change Ciudad Juarez
I
as they
hope.
mobilize.
I hope, along with us.
Yep.
Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you.
Representative Svarzbein.
And I have a little present. Somebody gave it to me. It's a little Pope pin.
A little Pope pin. Thank you very much. Thank you for watching us here on ABC-7 Extra. We're glad you joined us, and we hope you found this informative. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.